Lawyers of Reddit, what's the stupidest case you've been asked to take on, and did you? I am a personal injury lawyer in the UK. I took a call from a potential client that had fallen down the stairs in her own home. She had tripped over her own cat. She told me that she wanted to sue her local authority as her home was owned by the council and she was not allowed to keep pets as part of her lease. She claimed that when the house was inspected she was not told to get rid of the cat. It was therefore the council's fault that she fell down the stairs. We didn't take the case on. Not really stupid but unbelievable. My friend at work. His girlfriend filed for divorce a few weeks ago. That's right. They aren't married and common law doesn't apply in WA state. They lived together for 5 years. She has a job. She isn't on the mortgage. And she left him a few months ago. There are no kids involved. They were never engaged. In the divorce she wants him to leave his house and she wants to move back in. She wants him to pay her $2,800 a month for some reason. I referred him to my divorce attorney and now that attorney is probably going to represent him. The chick is nuts. She has already tried to get a restraining order against him that was dismissed. I dealt with a guy once who wanted me to take on his road traffic accident pie claim. He had written a poem in Yoruba about the accident. He refused to tell me anything about his case until he's read the whole thing in Yoruba, among other problems. I can't speak any fking Yoruba, as in, not one word, as in. That day was the first time I had ever heard of the Yoruba language. I'm not even from a part of the world where I might readily be mistaken for someone who speaks Yoruba. It's a West African language. And I am really obviously not from a West African background. I try to explain this to the guy who becomes very agitated and insists that he must read out his poem in Yoruba. I give up and tell him to get on with it so we can talk about his claim. He does. It takes him nearly 20 minutes to finish. Anyway, after he's done, he finishes and sits back with a big smile and says that he's certain I'll take his case on now. I begin to ask him some questions about his case, but he refuses to answer. He says that this poem, in Yoruba, is everything I need to know about his case. Basically, I tell him to FCK off and stop wasting my time. He does. But not before standing around outside my office for an hour or so, reading out his poem. To no one in particular. Over and over again. In Yoruba. Clients wanted to sue because there were no strawberries in her fruit salad which she bought from a supermarket. Thankfully a Seka. Without going into too many a lady once called asking us to sue her neighbors. They were using voodoo on her. Fortunately, she had psychic powers and thus knew what they were doing. I respectfully declined. Voodoo only works if you believe it does. Just tell any targets to stop believing in it. Because believing gives it power. I once represented a guy who was denied unemployment benefits after being fired from his job as a jizz mopper at an adult video store for sexual harassment. I won. My father is a patent attorney, and when I was around 14 he told me about a guy who wanted to patent the iPhone 3 because aliens had given him the design for it. My father told him that if the aliens originally designed then they were the ones that had to patent it, not him. A guy found a rock in the middle of Melbourne CBD that he believed came from an underground volcano, therefore he discovered the volcano and he owned the volcano and that the Melbourne City Council and indeed the Victorian government should pay him rent to live on top of his underground volcano. No, I did not take on the case. I run a consumer advocacy firm. I had a client come in and tell me that he bought a product and the company refused to honor the warranty after the product broke. I asked for lawyer for 12 years. Client was charged with stealing a mobile toilet. After we won he told me he still owns it. The FK has the thing in his backyard because he was lazy as FCK. His office was nearby. Forced him to deliver it back at night. Jesus. Still offended that he lied to me the whole time. My dad is an in-house lawyer for a major American insurance company. He once spent an entire year trying to help deny insurance benefits for a painter who had stepped off his ladder onto a cat, fallen down the stairs and become paralyzed. The insurance company was arguing that a cat was a commonly expected occupational hazard for a painter and that he was negligent in not checking for cats before stepping down. A whole year of his life over whether a cat is a known occupational hazard of house painting. NB, this is pretty graphic, so you might want to skip this one if you don't have a strong stomach. The guy who cut off all of his fingers would be a serious contender. He clearly had some really awful mental illness. I assumed schizophrenia or psychosis, but I never really found out what his deal was. Anyway, he had decided one evening that a good way to get some money would be to break into a butcher's shop and use a meat saw to cut all his fingers and both thumbs off at the knuckles. Which is pretty much exactly what he did. He was found the next morning, somehow having survived. He was put in a mental health facility and made a pretty much full, albeit fingerless, recovery. Anyway, he wanted to sue someone. He didn't really know who he wanted to sue. He had just got it into his head that if he was injured he would get compensation. I remember his biggest question was whether he would get more money if he went back and cut off his feet too. I'm a lawyer, but this happened to a friend of mine. He got engaged, and apparently this pissed off his ex-GF. The ex-GF sued him for custody of their 2 cats and $500,000 for something like the lost value of the cats because she claimed they were service animals. Hint: they were not at all service animals. I did insurance defense for a long time, including insurance fraud investigations for insurance companies. You wouldn't believe how many people take a video inventory of their house only to have it mysteriously burn down the next day. You really can't fix stupid. I'm a prosecutor, so I don't get hired to represent anyone. I work for the government, but I do have discretion over how the prosecution progresses, i.e., deciding to proceed, deciding what to offer in the event of a plea bargain, deciding to withdraw the charges, etc. I had a case a few months ago where a man was charged with shoplifting. Turned out he was 70 years old, had absolutely no criminal record, and had shoplifted a sandwich which he ate politely in the store. He honestly thought he had paid for it. I was so angry that he was ever charged in the first place. When I saw him in court, he was absolutely terrified. I withdrew the charges and wished him well. I have no idea how it progressed that far. Let me preface this. I had heard about the guy I'm going to mention below before I had actually met him. I thought this was an urban legend, until he came into my office one day. A guy in his late 50s early 60s comes into the lobby area of my office and starts a commotion that freaks out the receptionist. I was the closest attorney to the lobby, so I go out and talk to the guy. He was clearly mentally disturbed and presented the following story. Someone had implanted a device in his brain that was controlling his behavior. He believed it was being controlled by Baskin-Robbins and a former mayor of Detroit. He believed they were forcing him to do random things like going to bars to drink, taking the wrong turn when driving, forcing him to retire from his job, and a lot of very other intricate things. After asking him if he had seen any doctors regarding the implant, he got really upset and said that he thought the doctors were in on it as well. After telling him I couldn't help him and suggesting that he find some new doctors, he asked me if I knew any lawyers who specialized in his kind of case. I often wonder if the lawyer I referred him to was able to help him. I had a client come and saying that he needed to sue Stu for robbing all his checks. When I asked him if Stu had a last name, he said no. When I asked him if he knew any Stu, he said no. When I asked him what proof he had that Stu was robbing him, he showed me all of his pay stubs. There were clear monthly deductions by Stu. As soon as I saw it, I knew. I asked, do you have children? He said yes. I then told him your Stu is the SCU, the support collection unit. They take money out of your check to pay for your child. Double quote. He left the office insisting that we needed to find Stu. I'm in immigration, So most of my stupid cases involve people trying to con the system or forgot to tell us material information. One lady stood out, though. She was referred to us as a pro bono case. She was filing for asylum based on the fact that she's a Chinese national and she's also a devout Christian. If she was sent back, she would be persecuted based on religious reasons. So nothing weird up to this point. She provided me with statements about how she and her family were harassed by the local police and how certain members of her congregation were arrested. So I'm looking at the statements and the names and places sound familiar. Sure enough, a quick googling showed this was one of the bought stories. Essentially what happens is there are people on the internet that sells these packages of fake documents and stories for a successful asylum case. From what I've heard, it usually is a real case that was successful, and someone got a hold of the supporting documents and started mass producing them and selling them. I'm guessing you're supposed to change the names from the original, but this lady didn't. Another red flag was the fact that in her supporting documents, the witnesses kept referring to her in the male form. At first I thought the English translation had typos. But yeah, same thing in the original Chinese ones. I always thought it was more of an urban legend amongst immigration lawyers. Needless to say, I did not take her case. I have a friend who's a lawyer. One time, he worked a custody battle for a man following his divorce. The primary argument was that his ex-wife was a massive BTCH and would negatively impact the development of the children. The evidence consisted of statements from co-workers, Facebook arguments, and a list of her complaints she filed for frivolous things. He said it was a legitimate case, but everything about it was so petty and stupid. The guy won. Probably too late here, but I was a civil rights investigator. We had one guy complain that he was fired from his factory job because of his race. He was black. Owner of the factory said it was because the guy was smoking crack on his lunch break. Turns out he was smoking crack on his lunch break, but so were a few of his white co-workers, and they were not fired. The owner agreed to pay the guy 6 months of back pay and give him a neutral reference. When I was in law school, I did the criminal defense clinic where we help a public defender. I say help because they just give you small cases to do by yourself. I had a guy accused of shoplifting a yellow Fubu shirt. Guess what he wore to the trial? A GD yellow Fubu shirt. I asked the prosecutor to reoffer the plea deal. She did. And I convinced the guy to take community service and probation. If I remember correctly, our public defender system is tragically overworked and underfunded. I've been a lawyer for 9 years. And the best case so far was this elderly fellow was kicked out of a library for making an obscene gesture to every black librarian he saw. He tried to sue the library, and I was his legal consultant. Didn't take the case, but I advised him that he would get a better outcome by avoiding libraries altogether and not trying to sue the only PPL who will crush him in court, bar none. I had a teacher that worked for a major video game publisher, one of the top 10 ones. He told me that when people tried to sue them for small amounts due to some game being bad, they would just pay whatever the person wanted. It was cheaper than dealing with a country's terrible justice system. Except one day a guy sued them because a game was bad. He was a law student, self-representing, and tried to throw the book at the company. They decided to make an exception for this guy. They instead threw the book back at him. The lawsuit kept escalating until both sides wasted lots of time and money. Then his final stroke. They offered to settle in front of a judge. They're in front of the judge. They put the price of the game on the table in cash, and told the guy to just take it and stop bothering them. The judge thought it was very fair, and told the guy that if he refused that settlement he would be fined. Guy was very unhappy. He expended like $5,000 in bureaucracy and airplane fares to get $60. Not a lawyer, but lawyer friend and neighbor told me yesterday of a guy whose client is being sued, trying to turn this into a class action suit to boot, over chicken wings. The claim is that the 10 wings in his order actually constitute only 5 wings because there's 2 edible parts to a chicken wing. In chicken anatomy class this would be true. In restaurant chicken wing business not so. Worked as IT for a family law firm. One day a lady comes in asking to have an attorney look at her divorce. She goes in with the lawyer and tells him she wants the divorce on the grounds that he was beating her. The attorney explained that he would be willing to do it, but advised that because the marriage was so short, just a few months, the easiest way to get a divorce and get away from her abuser was just to file a no fault and get it over with. She starts yelling, throwing things at, and hitting him. Mind you, he is an older guy in his late 60s at this point, telling him that if she could get 4 other divorces from him then she could do it a 5th. She had married and divorced the same guy 4 times before this. The firm didn't take the case, but our sister firm, what we called the firm our firm split off of, did take on the guy's case. Turns out she had actually been the abusive one, basically holding him and their kids hostage with threats of telling the police he was molesting the kids and beating her. Sometimes you have no choice but to take it. I represented a guy who sold and leased cars. A woman worked for a company that let her drive a company van to work as part of a carpool effort. She'd keep the van at home and picked up fellow workers to go to work, then bring them back to their homes. One day going to work, she was stopped at a stoplight. Some guy didn't stop in time and bumped into the van. She got out to look. She and the other guy agreed no damage, so each went on her way. Later, a woman who was a passenger discovered she was injured. Went to a lawyer. The lawyer sued the company, the driver, and every passenger in the van. The lawyer deposed each passenger, got the name of their auto insurance company, sent a demand letter for coverage. One of the passengers said, "I don't have a car, but my sister does." So they sued the sister. He said, "I don't have insurance because I'll lease the car, and they provide insurance." So the lawyer sued my client and sent a demand letter for insurance coverage. My mother said that at a law firm she used to work at many years ago they had received a call from a gentleman that wanted to file a lawsuit against Walt Disney. When asked why he was filing suit, he claimed that the Disney characters were coming out of the TV and stealing food from his refrigerator. They told him they'd take the case for an advance fee of $100,000 and never heard back from him. I had a teacher who had to take on a case where she was defending an entertainment district, and after someone was murdered after getting robbed near there, she had to make the argument that it was partially her fault for parking in that poorly lit of an area. Guy came in and had a company build a shed on some land. On the phone, he told me it was built incorrectly. He insisted on meeting. When he got to my office, I asked him what was wrong with the building. Was it structurally deficient, dangerous, etc.? None of the above. Turns out it was not perfectly square with the road in front of it. It was off by a foot. You could not tell by the naked eye, but he would always know, and it bugged him. I told him that without any real damages, he had no case. He stormed out angrily.